In 2001, a Chicago police officer named Joseph Miedzianowski was convicted of narcotics trafficking and sentenced to life in prison. His story exemplifies how police corruption may undermine the rule of law and destroy public trust in law enforcement. Today, we bring you another episode of the most corrupt officers on the job. To top it off, they have been caught by the law and brought to justice. As mentioned earlier, in this episode, this is none other than Joseph Miedzianowski. Miedzianowski was born in 1953 in Chicago and began working for the Chicago Police Department in 1979. In the early 1980s, he quickly advanced through the ranks and became a detective in the CPD's drug squad. Miedzianowski was a very effective and skilled detective who was responsible for countless drug busts throughout the course of his career. Miedzianowski, on the other hand, began to engage in illicit conduct himself as his career evolved. He began working with drug dealers and traffickers in the late 1980s, supplying them with inside information about law enforcement operations and protecting them from arrest and prosecution. His corruption quickly grew worse. He began to actively participate in drug trafficking himself, transporting drugs and money over state boundaries using his position as a police officer. He also encouraged other police officers to join him, building a criminal organization within the CPD that was responsible for large-scale narcotics trafficking. Miedzianowski's illicit actions continued for years before he was apprehended in 1998. The FBI carried out a sting operation along with the help of CPD and thus caught him in the act. They charged him with various offenses. He was found involved in obstructing justice and drug trafficking. Miedzianowski was accused of being one of the most corrupt police officers in the Chicago history during his trial. The prosecution provided evidence that he used his position as a cop to conduct a number of crimes, including the trafficking of over 800 kilograms of cocaine and the laundering of millions of dollars in narcotics proceeds. The trial of Miedzianowski was a watershed moment in Chicago's criminal justice history. The case exposed the amount of corruption inside the city's police department and raised severe concerns about law enforcement organizations' ability to adequately police themselves. Miedzianowski was eventually found guilty of all counts leveled against him and condemned to life in prison without the chance of release. His case shook the law enforcement community and refocused attention on the importance of transparency and accountability within police departments around the country. Following his conviction, there was considerable call for reform within the CPD. The agency was chastised for failing to recognize and confront the systemic corruption that had allowed Miedzianowski to operate unchecked for years, as well as for failing to provide proper monitoring of its personnel. In response to these critiques, the CPD enacted a series of reforms aimed at strengthening the department's transparency and accountability. These reforms included the establishment of an independent oversight board, new standards for investigating police misbehavior, and enhanced training for officers on ethical and professional issues. Despite these advances, there are still concerns about police corruption and the need for greater accountability in law enforcement. The case of Joseph Miedzianowski is a stark reminder of the dangers of police misconduct and the significance of holding others accountable for their actions. Finally, his story emphasizes the significance of supporting the rule of law and the essential role that law enforcement plays in keeping our communities safe and secure. While there's been significant success in recent years in combating police corruption, there is still a lot of work to be done to guarantee that all law enforcement employees are held accountable. Throughout his trial, Miedzianowski maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence against him. He was convicted guilty of all charges in 2002 and sentenced to life in prison without the chance of release. While the vast majority of police officers serve their communities with dignity and integrity, examples like Miedzianowski's serve as a warning that even those tasked with protecting the law can be corrupted. As a result, law enforcement and the criminal justice system must remain watchful and hold individuals who abuse their positions accountable for their conduct. Justice was eventually served in the case of Miedzianowski, but only after years of investigation and prosecution. It is critical that law enforcement agencies emphasize rooting out corruption within their ranks while still maintaining the public's trust in their personnel. Only then can we hope to create a society in which justice is really blind and the rule of law is equally applied to all of us. Unlike many criminal prosecutions, which rely heavily on witness testimony or tangible evidence, corruption cases involving law enforcement agents can necessitate investigators navigating complicated networks of corruption and balancing acquiring evidence and preserving sources. The investigators in his case, for example, relied on wiretaps and surveillance to acquire evidence, and they also worked closely with a number of confidential informants who had inside knowledge of the department's corruption. While these approaches were successful in obtaining Miedzianowski's conviction, they also raised critical considerations regarding the balance between the obligation of law enforcement to safeguard the public and the need to guarantee that investigations are done ethically and within the confines of the law. Furthermore, this case demonstrates the difficulties in combating corruption inside law enforcement authorities. While the vast majority of police officers labor tirelessly to enforce the law and protect their communities, others are willing to use their positions of power for personal benefit. This is especially true in circumstances when cops are given broad latitude in their duties, such as drug enforcement, where they may have access to large amounts of seized cash and drugs. To address these concerns, law enforcement must remain vigilant in its attempts to root out corruption and foster an accountability and transparency culture. This includes putting in place strong internal controls and oversight procedures, as well as holding officers accountable for their acts, regardless of level or position. However, people need to feel safe. They need to have this semblance of security and peace in order to go on about their daily lives. This can only be done once it is ensured that the true purpose is not only punishing individuals who violate the law, but also acting to prevent corruption from occurring in the first place. This entails providing officers with appropriate training, tools, and support, as well as fostering a culture that emphasizes ethical behavior and upholds the highest professional standards. Joseph Miedzianowski's legacy is one of infamy, serving as a reminder of the risks of police enforcement corruption. His case demonstrated the need of law enforcement authorities remaining diligent in their efforts to combat corruption and foster a culture of transparency, accountability, and ethical behavior. Many law enforcement agencies have improved their internal controls and supervision procedures in the years since Miedzianowski's conviction. They have tightened hiring and screening procedures and created new training programs to help cops spot and avoid circumstances that could lead to corruption. Internal affairs divisions have also been established in several agencies to investigate charges of wrongdoing and ensure that officials are held accountable for their acts. Miedzianowski's case has also spurred a broader discussion on the role of law enforcement in society, as well as a necessity for greater openness and accountability in law enforcement. Many advocates have advocated for enhanced civilian supervision of police forces, as well as expanded community participation in the establishment of policing policies and procedures. These efforts strive to restore trust between law enforcement agencies and the communities they serve, as well as to hold officers to the highest standards of professionalism and ethical behavior. Finally, the Joseph Miedzianowski case should serve as a wake-up call to law enforcement officers and others in positions of power that corruption will not be tolerated. Engaging in criminal conduct can have serious ramifications, not only for the individual involved, but also for their family, co-workers, and the communities they serve. We may fight to avoid corruption and promote a more just and equitable society by holding officers accountable for their actions and encouraging a culture of transparency and ethical behavior. That's all for today, folks. We will see you next time.